Today is Friday, June 6, 2014. My name is Jason Higgins, and I'm an intern with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the OSU Library. I'm in Stillwater to interview Charles Russell and discuss his life experiences, including his service in the United States military. This is part of the Spotlighting Oklahoma Oral History Project. And Mr. Russell, I would like to thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
To begin, can you tell us a little bit about when and where you were born in your hometown?
Yeah, I was born in Watts, Oklahoma. My father was part Indian, and he came from Georgia. And back in 1907, or thereabouts, when they parceled out land all the Indians, and he got a farm, and that's where I was born, on the farm, for his part for his allotment. And Watts is right close to Westfield, and I went to school at Watts 1 year in high school, and then they started busing kids in to Westfield, and I thought, oh, we take the bus. I had to walk mile and a half to catch the bus, and ride it then for about an hour or so to get to school, and it wasn't bad, but riding the bus kept you from participating in the other school activities because you had to ride the bus, and they wouldn't wait for you. They had time to go home and a time to get there. So, and if you did get involved in something in school, well, you had to walk home, and that was about 8 miles. So
all
anyway,
work and no play.
I graduated in 1938, and I knew I wasn't going to go to college because we didn't have the money. We raised kind of poor on a rocky farm, and so I spent 2.5 years in the old CCC camp, Civilian Conservation Corps, if you've heard of that.
Yes, sir.
Which was a great program for a lot of people at that time, a lot of young guys, and they did a lot of good. And I was working in the camps had different jobs. One I was in was soil conservation. Then it had other camps it was forest. Other camps it was parks.
Right.
Parks,
Yes, sir.
and so forth. And but anyway, it was really educational, and I got out of that. And then the war started over, and so I always been interested in flying.
So let's back up for a minute.
Okay.
You were born in 1921, right?
Yeah.
So you grew up in the Depression era.
Yeah.
Your father was a farmer,
Yeah.
I believe. So
Yeah.
what was that like? Did you help out on the farm growing up as a kid whenever you weren't at school?
Had all kinds of milk cows and took care of cattle and sheep and pigs and chickens and all of that sort of stuff. We always had plenty to eat. We never had much money. We'd take a chicken or two to town and get some money to buy some sugar and coffee and stuff like that. But anyway.
So you learned how to work hard from an early age.
It was a lot of hard work.
Did you have a large family?
No, I didn't. I just have a brother. That's all that was it. But my mother was from a family of 12.
Wow.
And my father was from a family of 9. So I had cousins out the gazoo. All over the place. Most of them passed away by now. And, well, I won't jump to the... Anyway.
So during this time, you got interested in airplanes from an early age. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh yeah, I used to make airplanes that wouldn't fly, but they looked like airplanes, and I didn't have very much timber and lumber to make them, but I take sometimes orange crate has thin sides on it, so I take those sides off and make the wings and everything, and it looked like an airplane, and put a prop on it, and it wouldn't go anywhere. But when I was in the CC camp, the library there had 2 books on flying, and I read those things, I bet, a dozen times. I was about the only one that ever checked them out of the little library we had, and so I got a little bit of learning about what makes an airplane fly and why and so forth. And I got into the cadet program kind of accidentally to do to train to be a pilot in 1942, early in the summer. University of John Brown University in Solo Springs got in the business of training people to be glider pilots.
Okay.
All they just gave them the basic training, flying, and then they go someplace else for the rest of the training.
I see.
And so I went up there and I said, well, that's flying, I'll try that. And so I signed up, but we had to go take the cadet exam. Back in those days, they had reduced the requirements quite a bit for guys to get in training for pilots. Before you had to have 2 years of college, and then they dropped that and take guys out of high school. Anyway, I went to Tulsa, took the cadet exam, and I passed it. And they said, well, you can go to flying school. I said, all right, let's go.
What kind of questions were on the test? Was it
Gosh,
information that
know.
you learned from those 2 books? Or was it general stuff?
Just general stuff,
I see.
primarily. It wasn't anything to do much with flying.
I see.
Good.
So let's back up a few months then.
Okay.
Do you recall the events or the day of December 7th, 1941?
Yep.
What do you remember from that day?
Well, I was working on a camp up there in Missouri, working at night, building roads in the camp. They just, at that time, they were starting to build up, and I was working 12 hours at night from 6 to 6.
Mm.
And I got off at 6, and I started to check out where we're supposed to check out. And they said the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. And we were going to go to war. Well, I continued to work on the camp for a while, and then I quit and went back home. This camp was only about 100 miles or so up in Missouri.
Oh, let's see.
Close to Joplin, Missouri. And then where the pickup where I started getting into glider training.
Oh, I see. So, did you plan on going to war after you heard that the Japanese attacked?
You don't know. I knew that I had to sign up for the draft because at that point, just after they bombed Pearl Harbor, while 2 months I was 21.
Oh.
And I had to sign up for the draft.
I see.
So I didn't want to be drafted, so that's pushed me to get into the flying school.
Okay.
And had to get released from the draft board because when they get a hold of somebody, they don't want to turn them loose. So they gotta get a hold of somebody else. And so I went down to the draft board, and the girl that was working there was in my high school class, so she signed the thing.
Lucky you.
So I didn't have to fight with them. So, well, that was in July of 42, and I started in the long process about, we had in 9 weeks increments. Once you got started in San Antonio on pre-flight, you went 9 weeks there. You had ground school and physical training and all that. Learned how to do parades and all that sort of stuff. And then we went to primary flying school for 9 weeks, and then basic flying school for 9 weeks, and then advanced. They were all in different places.
I see.
And so the first primary school was in Coleman, Texas, and then I went to Sherman, Texas for basic, and then Houston for advanced.
I see.
And then after I graduated from the flying school, I got commissioned, got silver wings. That's what everybody was wanting. Well, I went back to Fort Worth then to fly the B-24. Learned how to fly it. And after that, I then, you want to go ahead with the rest of that?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, what kind of physical and psychological training did you do during your basic and your advanced training before you got your wings?
Oh.
Could you maybe take us through a typical day training?
Oh. Well, in primary, we studied all about airplane engines. And, let's see. Oh, we had a course in physics, basic physics, you know. I don't know what that was for. And weather, we had always had weather. And every school we had another course in weather. Aircraft identification. And physical training, we had games and lots of running. They had a track laid out, and we had to do lots of running. The primary school was a civilian school, so we weren't bothered much with parades or that sort of thing there. It was real nice, and they have the best food in the world. And then we went to basic, and that was military. And then we got back to where we had parades and everything. So it was back in the. We knew it was back in the service.
And which branch was that? I understand the Air Force wasn't its own branch.
Well, that was Army Air Corps.
Army Air Corps.
Yeah, it wasn't Army Air Force, it was Army Air Corps.
Right.
The Corps would be less than the force, I guess, in the size. And that's when we graduated. It was still Army Air Corps.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Do you remember your first time flying?
Yeah. The first flight I ever had was when I was in high school. I guess I was in the 10th grade. And in the fall of the year, the school usually take the school bus and take us to Muskogee to the state fair.
Oh.
And so we went to the state fair, and I had 50 cents in my pocket to spend, you know. And me and another guy, saw an airplane out there on the racetrack, and we dashed over, went over there, and we asked the guy, "Would you take us for a ride?" He said, "Yeah." We said, "How much?" And he said, $1. If he'd said more, we couldn't have gone. But this other kid had 50 cents, and I had 50 cents, so we both got into the airplane. And he just took off and flew around, circled, and come back to land. And I thought, boy, that's great. And when I told my mother about it, I got in trouble. She didn't like that at all. Especially when I spent all the 50 cents.
So how did she feel whenever she found out that you went to flight training school?
She didn't like that either. No, she was always afraid I was going to get killed, I guess. I don't know. And and they didn't like it when, well, let's see, when the war was over and I came home and I got out of the service and I started school here at A&M.
Right.
This was in 1946, and I went a little over a year, and then I was recalled. The service was always building up or kicking people out, building up or kicking them out, and so when the war was over, they just kicked everybody out.
Yes, they did.
Practically. And then wasn't long till they thought, oh my gosh, there's Russia over there. They're going to kill us all. So it started building up again. And I got into that. And so I was called up, and they sent me to school to learn to be a communications officer.
I see.
Learn all the communications we had in those days, which was a heck of a lot. And then after I got out of that school, I went to what they call SAC, Strategic Air Command, in Tucson, Arizona. And we were training in B-29s.
Mm.
They were,
Super forces.
LeMay was building up his Strategic Air Command, and they had airplanes that had been pickled in Salt Lake City and for a year or so, and they brought them down there, and we had to fly them, and they had all kinds of problems.
Well, before we get to there, let's talk about the Liberator. Do you remember the first time you got on board a Liberator?
Oh yeah. That was in Fort Worth, Texas.
What was that like?
First. Oh, it's a big son of a gun. And it was in the summertime, and sitting there on the ramp, the inside the air cockpit gets hot as the devil, and you get in there and you just can't wait to get the airplane off the ground so it cooled off a little bit. But anyway, we did, and I had an instructor and a partner I flew with all the time, and we'd switch back and forth. He'd fly in the left seat one time, and I'd fly in the left seat one time. And had a real good instructor.
Can you recall their names?
My partner was P.K. Smith from Oklahoma City. He passed away several years ago, and the instructor, I thought I'd never forget his name.
I'm sure it'll
He was-
come back to you.
He was from Texas, and an old cavalry. He said when he first got in the service, he was riding in the cavalry, riding horses, you know. And so, but then he went into fly school. But that was pretty nice. We were there for about a month and a half, I guess. Learned to fly that thing. And then they turned us loose. Sent us to replacement depots. And I went to Salt Lake City. And they had hundreds of guys, all have navigators, bombardiers, gunners, and we had so many people they couldn't house us all in the little airport barracks, so they just put cots in the arena in the playground, not the playground, but the fairgrounds.
I see.
It had a cover on it, big cover. All of these beds of guys, and we were in that for 2 or 3 days, and then they finally put us all together and made the cruise, and they sent us out to Wendover, Utah, which is out past the Salt Flats on the west side of the Salt Flats. And it's not necessarily the end of the world, but you can see it from there. And anyway, it was, we formed up crews then and started, and the flying formations. And after we got where we could fly formation, well, we went on long navigational trips and so forth, and bombing different places. Not bombing, but actually, not actually dropping bombs, but bombing them anyway.
Right.
Anyway, then in February of '44, we all took off to go to overseas. They wouldn't tell us where we were going. And we flew to Kansas and then to Miami, Florida. And we stayed in Miami a day or two. And then they told us to take off there, and we were supposed to fly to Trinidad in South America. And they gave me an envelope and said, "This is where you're going, but you're not supposed to open it until you're out 1 hour out of after takeoff." And I said, "Oh, sure, yeah."
Right.
And so we took off about midnight, and I opened that envelope, and everybody wanted to go to England anyway. They didn't want to go to China or India or Italy. So we took off, and we got off late, and we stopped in Puerto Rico. That's about halfway to Trinidad. And they told us that to get into Trinidad before noon, because of the thunderstorms built up in the afternoon, you know. So we stopped in Puerto Rico, and the commander there got a hold of me and chewed me out for landing there. I wasn't supposed to. I was supposed to go to so he said, "Well, okay, you can stay, but you're going to leave tomorrow." And so we then took off early the next morning and went to Trinidad. And we stayed there for 2 or 3 days. And then we took off from there and went to Belém, Brazil, which is right on the Amazon River, just on the south side of it. And they told us that they have thunderstorms down there that goes up to 50,000 feet, so don't try to fly over them, just fly through them.
Did you guys get to relax any during the flight, or in Brazil, or in Puerto Rico at all?
Well, we did in Puerto Rico. We got in there just early in the morning, because about 6 o'clock or 7 when we got in there, and we went to breakfast, and then we went to the officers club and the 4 officers, and it's way up on the hill, and the ocean was coming in and out of there, and so we had a little lemonade and and in the sun, and enjoyed sitting there. The war was a long ways away.
Yes, sir.
Anyway, after we got when we couldn't ever get any good coffee. Puerto Rico, Trinidad, the coffee was terrible. And we thought, well, when we get down to Brazil, we ought to get some good coffee. And we got to down to Berlin, and the coffee there was worse than it was at the other places. So, we went then from Berlin down to another place in southern Brazil. I'll think of it in just a second. From there, we flew across the Atlantic Ocean to Dakar, Africa. And then we flew from there up to Marrakesh, which is in the French foreign territory. And from there we flew to Wales, and from there to our base in England. And we finally got to England in let's see, we left in February, March. Well, I guess we got there about the middle of March.
In 44?
Yeah, 44.
Before we were interrupted, you were talking about thunderstorms.
Oh, well, yeah. We looked up ahead as we got down close to the Amazon River, and there's just clouds everywhere. And we said, okay, they said, fly through it. And we flew into it, and the rain was so heavy that the engines would stop, and it drowned them out, and then it'd catch again, and it scared the heck out of me. But and the airplane wasn't very waterproof, and boy, we all got wet, and that we flew through that for about 20, 30 minutes, and on the other side it was all clear. We could see the Amazon River. Where we crossed it was as big as the ocean, about 140 miles wide. It comes down, and this goes like this, and spreads all over the place.
Wow.
And the fresh water goes out into the Atlantic Ocean about a couple of miles or so.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, well, anyway, we got to England all right.
So was that the calm before the storm?
What?
That flight before you got to England. So how was? Did it get scarier from there?
We landed in Wales, and we stayed there until they got 3 or 4 B-24s to escort over there. They wouldn't trust us to fly over to England because of all of the navigational procedures and so forth. So they bring a guy in there, and he leads us. We fly on his wing, and he would pass our base, and he said, "There's our base down there," and we'd just peel off and land, and he'd take the rest of them to other places where their bases were. And as soon as we got on the ground, when we, before we left, they gave us a whole bunch of K rations and supplies and stuff like that in the airplane in case we need them. And we never did. And as soon as we landed, why, one of the officers out there said, "Where's the rations?" And he took them. And that son of a gun took them to his room. We never saw him again.
So was that like a hazing of the new guys?
No, they did. No, we had all been together since, well, in November, December, January, all flying together. We all knew each other, and that was a kind of a plus. Yeah, I guess at our when we started flying, we knew all the other guys, and they wasn't like a joining one guy joining all the others, replacements. And we didn't lose very many of the original guys, but as we got replacements, seemed like they were the ones that we lost. I don't know why. So I don't,
So do you remember your first bombing mission?
First one?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You want to talk about that day a little bit?
Yeah, it's, we were supposed to go up to a target up close to Berlin, and I was well, the operations officer was flying with me, and so we got up close to the target, and they said, "We got airplanes out here that supposed to be providing cover for us. P-51s." And we looked at them, and they were not 51s. German airplanes.
Wow.
And they attacked us, and I can remember just plain as day, sitting there and see one coming up there, and you could see the guns firing, like that, winking at you. But they were winking at somebody over here, and they flew right like this, and I could see the pilot, and they're just as plain as day.
Wow.
He went on through the formation, and I guess came back and circled again. But he didn't attack us, so I guess he did shoot down maybe one or two planes, I don't know. Never did know.
How long were the runs?
Well, that particular one was about 9 hours.
9 hours.
We had shorter ones and had longer ones. Going down to Munich was a long flight. Well, see, what made part of the flight so long, it took about almost an hour or so for the whole formation to form. And they had the radio beacons here, 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 here. And each one of these each group was assigned a beacon orbit around. And then they make it bigger orbits. And somebody had this all planned out. And it was timed to come around and fly out. And it was beautiful to watch. Kind of hairy.
Yeah. Did you do anything for luck? Did you have any lucky charms?
No, not really. When I graduated from flying school, we all wanted to buy a ring. And the jeweler said he couldn't give us a gold ring because gold was going to war. And he gave us a silver. And everybody had a silver ring. And I had one. And I wore that for all the missions, not for any reason, but I don't know why. And I also worked for all the missions I flew in Korea. And the other day I mailed it off to give it to my son so he would have it before it was. She grabbed it.
How many people were on the B-24 Liberator? How many people were in the crew?
Well, there was 2 pilots, a bombardier and a navigator, and a radio operator, and an engineer, and then four gunners in the back. 2 waist gunners and a ball turret gunner and a tail gunner. And 10 guys.
10 guys.
Yeah.
And did all of the original 10 make it throughout the war?
All of mine did, yeah. Yeah. When we left the States here, going overseas, the guy I had as a co-pilot, they had decided to give him a crew when they got to England. And the guy that I was going to be my co-pilot, I picked him up. He went on a boat over there, and after we got to England, then he joined us, and he flew with us for about 30 missions, and then they gave him a crew. The new crew that came in, he took over as a pilot on that crew. And on the second mission that he flew, he came in and landed the airplane like this, and it killed everybody except one tail gunner.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
So, how many missions a week on average did you fly?
Oh, you didn't fly, but about every 3-4 days.
And
Except one time, they had I don't know why they, but we flew and bombed Munich, and the very next day, flew there again. And that's 2 in a row, and that's about 11-hour flight.
Wow.
And the thing about it is, I wasn't scheduled to fly on the first one, and so myself and another guy went out pubbing. We came in about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I started pulling my shoes off, and the CQ came in and said, "You're flying today." And so that was a terrible flight.
I bet. So were the majority of these missions dangerous? Were they usually intercepted by enemy planes?
The planes were not really the problem. The flak was a big problem. You had to encounter flak every time. I flew some missions and never saw any enemy airplanes because by that time we had pretty good fighter protection cover. But they couldn't do anything about the flak that came through anyway. And no matter how high you flew, well, they could shoot that high.
So what did you do? Did you just hope for the best?
Just up there. Fly through it. If you could see it, it'd just be a black puff, you know. But if you could hear it, that's close. And when they explode, it just throws shrapnel all directions. And if you hear it, why, you know that one went off pretty close to where you are.
Do you recall these missions, were they strategic factories and things like that you were bombing? Or did you know?
Railroad yards, factories. Towards the end of the war, the Germans were shooting a lot of missiles into London. And they had those missile sites were over just across the channel. And we bombed those quite a bit where they could find them, but they were kind of, they could move them pretty easy. That was all they did was a big truck, you know, and they'd shoot that thing off.
Right.
And
did the B-24s carry incendiary bombs?
oh, we carried all kinds.
Wow.
Yeah. We dropped, that's one of the things we'd have a mixture of incendiary bombs and explosive bombs. High explosive, you know. And drop 500-pound bombs, 100-pound bomb, 250-pound bombs, all kinds. Somebody else figured that out. We didn't have to do that. And somebody else loaded the airplane, so we just flew whatever they had.
Did you have a nickname for your plane?
Was a picture on a calendar. And if you hold it up this way, that's the way it was on the calendar.
Let's see.
Had a little airplane up here winding up, and prop work was blowing her skirt. And so we painted this way.
All right. Tailwind.
You know, we had a guy in Kansas paint this picture, and he was a good artist. And time we got down to Brazil, why, this paint started to run. And we also had guys that would sign their name on the leg, you know, the maintenance guys, different places. And so we hired a guy to touch it up. And he wasn't very good. He kind of made it didn't look that way as good as it did before.
All right.
This guy, this co-pilot here, was the one that they gave a crew. He flew with me all the way overseas, and then as soon as they got there, why, they gave him a crew.
And it's Alfred L. Robinson.
Yeah.
Right.
And this they're all dead except this one and Al Gross and Andy. Andy's one of these down here. That might be Andy right there.
All right.
Bombardier. He came to see me about 2 weeks ago. He was driving through from New Mexico back to Minnesota. He'd been out to New Mexico to see his son, who's in the Air Force.
Do you recall any favorite memories with these guys?
Oh, I got well, I don't know, not really, I guess. I used to keep in touch with nearly all of them until they started passing away. And not, about 3 or 4 months ago, I got an email from one of the guy's son. He was on the crew. And his father had passed away, but he found my name in on the internet. We have a thing, if you go on the internet, 467th Bomb Group, well then you get all kinds of history of the bomb group.
Oh, okay.
And all of the pictures of all the crews and airplanes and stories about them, so forth.
I see. So during these 3 or 4 days you had between flights, what did you guys do to unwind?
Ground school.
Ground school.
Or we had an old West Point commander, and he didn't stand still for you having his time off. He kept us going. Sometimes they would have us fly practice missions, and they were about as bad as well, not quite as bad, but as the regular missions. I saw on one time on our assembly a B-24 and a B-17 run together in the air. Let's see, they go like this, and they hook the wings.
Oh my.
And then knocked the wings off of both of them, and just scattered the guys all over Hell's Half Acre. I don't know whether they were able to recover enough to parachute out or what. But most of them, the pilot and co-pilots, about the only ones that wore the parachute all the time because they were sitting in the seat. The rest of the guys had harness on and had a parachute that they could just hook on to it. And one guy flew about 25 missions with this little pack, and one day he decided to look at the harness and the parachute, and both of them had hooks on them. You couldn't hook them together because some of them had a D-ring here and to hook into, and some of them had hooks up here, and the pack had D-rings on it.
Oh no.
And he had one. He couldn't have failed out. Anyway.
How did he react when he found out about that?
Oh, but that time he just laughed about it. It was all over.
So you guys get to try any English ale while you were in England?
Did what?
Any ale or any English beer while you were there?
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a hell of a lot of that. Sometimes we get a couple of days off, and I used to like to go to London, and they had some good shows down there, and stage shows, like, oh heck, I'll think about it. That I saw. No, Nanette was one of them.
Mm.
And another was where they had two old maids and a crazy uncle that used to run up and down the stairs yelling, "Charge!" And that was a kind of a popular play. And what the hell was the name of that? Oh, well, maybe I'll think of that in a minute. And I also, London had more girls.
Oh yeah. And you're a bachelor then, I'm assuming. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you make any friends with the RAF, the Royal Air Force?
Not while I was there, but after the war is over and so forth, some of the people that lived around our base did a lot of work for us, and they would come to our reunions here in the States. And I got to know one of them real well. Some of them got passed away about 2 or 3 months ago. And he wrote some books. He was a writer. And he one day he wanted me to write something for him. He said, just write a typical mission. What happens, you know? And so I wrote up a thing for him, and by gosh, he put it in his book.
Really? Do you know the name of the book?
See that big heavy book?
The 467th?
Yeah. Yeah. I got acknowledgement in there of, and I'll find that if you want to see it.
Well, if the library doesn't have it, we'll have to request it.
Huh?
We'll have to request a copy of that if the library doesn't already own it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, hell, here's the index of things in here.
Where
Let's
you're
see.
mentioned. Okay. So the story of the tailwind.
256.
You got 259 there. Well, I'm interviewing a celebrated author. I didn't know.
Celebrate what?
A celebrated author.
Oh, no, I'm not.
Do you remember the author's name?
Perry Watts.
Perry Watts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here it is. Well, this page, this have to go with this because it tells you what things. This is a story of how it got its name.
Alright.
I don't know who made this out.
How many missions did the tailwind run? How many missions?
When they first started flying over there, it was 25. By the time we got there, it was 30.
Hmm.
And before we started flying missions, it was 35. They just kept up. So my crew flew 16 missions as the deputy lead. And the leader was up here and the deputy lead was here. If the leader had to get out or something, well, then the other one took over. And so we flew 16 missions that way, and they let us off with 33. Here's a better picture of I don't know what. Here's. Don't lose this. This tells you where.
All right. That's very interesting. Well, we'll come back to this.
Okay.
So, did you receive any air medals?
Yeah.
Would you mind talking about those a little bit?
Yeah. I got the DFC. And air medal. Is that light still running?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well, that's all right. You take your time.
Yeah, I was going to show you. In one of these I have oh well, I have a picture of all of the medals on them, I think, and my step daughter was looking at that one day. She said, "Ooh," said, "How many of these you got?" I said, "All of them."
So, were any of those medals for individual missions, or were they just for your time in service?
They, if you finished all the missions, well, they usually give you a DFC, the air medals were for a certain number of missions. There we go.
Well, you were quite decorated, sir.
And these others are for occupation and being there when the war was being fought.
Can you recall your most dangerous mission?
Oh,
Or were so many dangerous?
33 of them.
33 of them.
This paragraph here was about the time that we were flying over Lubeck in Germany, and we got hit by flak, and it knocked the windshield out right in front of me. Knocked a hole about that big.
Wow.
And at high altitude, plexiglass, when it's cold, it shatters like the Higgins. And I got covered all over with glass, you know. Fortunately, I had a pair of sunglasses on that they'd gave me to test out. They were, most of them were green, but the ones they gave me were brown. And I wanted to see how they looked. And I had those on. I usually didn't wear sunglasses, and but anyway, that kept the whole front lens was just covered with pieces of plexiglass, you know. And I had an oxygen mask on to cover the rest of my face. So fortunately, I didn't get really hurt anything except right up here, where the helmet and the glasses didn't cover what I got. And so they said, "Well, you didn't bleed enough to get an air medal," so they just forgot about it. But
And was that on the return, or was that going toward the mission?
I think that was on our return.
How did the airplane fly back with that air coming through?
Oh, we had a lot of women knitted caps for us, and they put a semi-skid in the front of it and cut holes in it, for the eyes. And you put it over your head. It was pretty nice, but we didn't like to wear them, so we turned them wrong side out and used the semi-skid to wipe the windshield off when it got sweaty. And so, anyway, the radio operator took one of those and wound it up, stuck it in the hole to keep the wind coming in,
Right.
And so, but we just looked around the side of the thing. Here's that, this is all typed up, I guess. This is typed up.
Okay. And how many engines was on the B-24?
4.
4 engines. And did you ever have engine difficulty?
Oh yeah. If you want to borrow that book, you can. If you return it sometime.
Yes, sir.
Okay, you can do that.
So what would happen whenever the engines had difficulty or malfunction?
Well, I got the engine shot out one time. It's come back with just 3. That wasn't any real big problem. Once you got the bombs dropped, why the airplane will fly okay on 3 engines. And so it wasn't really a big deal. But that's about the only time I ever had it in the engine trouble that I remember.
What other problems could cause delays or any other problems in a flight?
Cold weather. At 20,000 feet, even in the summertime, the temperature is about 20 below zero. And we had the clothes that we had, some had heated suits, and they plug them in. And I wore the heated suit, but I couldn't plug it in because you had to have the shoes and gloves all plugged in to complete the circuit, And I couldn't find any shoes big enough for me. So I just wore the regular old GI shoes, and that worked out pretty good. But you had to fight the cold all the time and fight the oxygen. You had to keep in touch with all the guys all the time, because a guy can lose his oxygen by just coming unplugged, and he can't tell it unless he sees it. Breathing the rarefied air, you don't know it, and until you pass out. And so we had a deal rigged up. We'd have everybody looking out for each other. So that worked out pretty good. But you had to do that all the time. Cold weather made it difficult. Wearing gloves, you can't do very much with gloves on, no matter what they say. Yeah. So that B-24 was, the wind whistled through it all over. It had breaks where the wind came through. It wasn't near as nice as the B-17. It was pretty closed in.
Let's see.
But that's what we had to fly.
Right. You guys dealt with what you had, what you
Yeah.
was given.
You go with what you have.
Well, as you know, today is June 6th, and it's the 70th anniversary of D-Day, Operation Overlord. Can you discuss your involvement in that?
Yeah. I didn't fly on the day that the 6th of June. Earlier, the month or two before that, we were playing softball, and I fell down and put my arm out like this and broke a bone in my elbow, and my arm swelled up, and I couldn't bend it this way too much or straighten it out too much. But anyway, that got well. I was flying missions again, and we went on down to Norwich. Had some time off with the crew, and we all had bicycles. And we're coming back, and this friend of mine, we were always trying to knock each other off a bicycle, and he came in front of me, and I fell off the bicycle and chipped the same bone in my elbow, and it swelled up again. And when D-Day came, they gave me the job of being the CQ in the operations room, and none of my crew flew on the, but a couple of days later, we were flying on the D-Day, and we could see all of the boats and all the people who were trying to come ashore and all that stuff, and we tried to bomb ahead of them, bomb bridges or whatever, and at lower altitudes. We bombed one about 12,000 feet. That's the lowest we ever got in the missions. We bombed a bridge across the river, and we knocked it out. But that's about the extent of except there was so damn many airplanes in the air that you had to be careful. Even after D-Day, some of the guys flew 2 missions a day on D-Day. Like early in the morning and later in the afternoon. But I didn't. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for that. So, after D-Day, did you guys go back to bombing Germany, or did you stay with the troops as they made their advance to Germany?
Both.
Both?
Yeah. Okay. Whatever was called for. When I finished my missions, 33 missions, on the 8th of August, and I got a job down in London with I thought I was going to stay in London, but I didn't. As soon as I got there, they sent me to France. I was assigned to psychological warfare as part of the 12th Army Group. And so my job was to try to get fighter pilots to fly with a leaflet bomb on their airplane, to drop leaflets on the troops. But they didn't like to do that. They wanted something that explodes, and they refused to fly some of them. And someone in London thought if they sent a pilot over there, maybe he could talk them into flying it. I never did have any trouble with it, but before I guess they had some trouble.
Now, were these leaflets aimed toward the civilians in Germany, France?
No, toward the troops.
To the Americans and the Allies.
Yeah, well, I'll take that back. When they were decided to really bomb the city of Aachen up in Belgium, in Germany, up close to Belgium, they dropped leaflets to the people there to get the hell out, because they was going to blow it all to hell.
Right.
And they did. Oh God, I was in there, and these great big tall brick buildings, all empty inside, you know, because they've been bombed with fire bombs and explosive bombs and everything. But most of the bombs we had were like a good conduct leaflet. It was addressed to the soldiers that if they come over to our side and surrendered, well, they got food, cigarettes, and all that stuff, and no more war. You know?
Right, right.
And was in Paris, I had some Frenchmen loading those leaflets into the bombs. They were practice bombs, and they rolled them up and stuck them in there in little packages. And some of them could read German, and they read those leaflets, and they got mad. I said, "Well, give that to us! You know, don't give those krauts."
Oh, they wanted the cigarettes.
Yeah, cigarettes and food, everything.
Wow.
Well, anyway, we also had a printing press that they could print leaflets for a situation, you know, and drop leaflets. And so, well, I don't know how effective they were. No one really knew, I guess, how much. But I know when they made a movie of this, of the Battle of the Bulge, it showed a bunch of troops all sitting there waiting for something. And one guy got up and he was going out behind the bushes there to relieve himself, and he picked up some of these leaflets. I took them with me.
That's funny.
Oh, well.
So how long were you in Paris?
Well, I was on about 3 days, something like that.
But you were in France for a while.
Yeah.
So what effects did you see from the war on the civilian populations in France?
Well, if they weren't really right in the middle of it, while they were off to one side, they sort of like us. War's going on over there, you know.
I see. So they went about their daily routines.
Yeah. Well, they had to. And on top of that, they would try to. We had truck lines carrying supplies up to the front, off the boat, and on long hills, those trucks go real slow, and these guys could run out there and jump on the truck and throw stuff off. And their friends would pick it up.
Let's see. So did you get to know any of the civilians there? Did you make friendships, relationships?
No, well, I couldn't speak into French. Besides, well, I don't know. I just didn't wasn't associated with the
I see.
population.
Well, you provide a valuable service and perhaps the most significant event in the world's history. You know, fighting against Nazism, Adolf Hitler, fascism. What do you feel contributed to the victory of democracy?
Oh, well, our bombing, they called it strategic bombing, really had an effect on it because it just, they couldn't do anything, couldn't manufacture anything, couldn't move anything but trains. We'd bomb the trains, and later on, the fighters go over there doing fighter sweeps, and they would attack the trains. They'd and whatever. My brother was a prisoner of war over there, and he said that the Germans themselves didn't have anything to eat, and they would sometimes not give them Red Cross partials, so forth. And so they were all starving. The guys in the prison camp and the civilians. So, yeah, it was a terrible effect on all of them.
War always is.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
During that time, the Allied forces perhaps contributed to one of the greatest moments in history, the liberation of Europe. What is the greatest aspect of humanity that you witnessed during that time, personally?
Well, I really don't know. I was always thinking about myself all the time. I know when I first went to Paris, they put me up in a real fancy hotel, and just off of Place de Madeleine and church, and I thought, well, boy, when I go down for breakfast, I'm going to have a good breakfast, And went down there, sat down, and had china, silverware, crystals, everything, And I thought, well, that's great. And this waiter came in, and he had a little tray, and he had a K ration. And that's what I had. K ration.
At least you ate it in style.
So I ate it in style with real nice silver.
That's funny.
And I only stayed in Paris a short time because they moved me on out to a little town close to Metz in Germany, and they had the Germans had Metz pretty well fortified, and the troops had not passed Metz, and this little town that we were in, that I was in, was headquarters for the 19th Tactical Air Command. And one day, in the briefing room there, I saw Jimmy Doolittle was over there, and General Patton.
Right.
They were planning a bombing mission, or using 8th Air Force airplanes to drop bombs on Metz to soften it up at least, so that they could take it,
Mm-hmm.
Patton's outfit. And there, I remember that. That was a great day. Just forced me up that black chair was old Patton with all his shiny stuff, you know, and Jimmy Doolittle.
Wow.
Jimmy Doolittle, little guy, well, yes, old Patton's a great big guy. And of course I didn't get to talk to him. They didn't want to talk to me anyhow.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, on the opposite side of that first question, that was certainly a dark time in human history. What was the darkest aspect of humanity that you personally witnessed during that time?
For me,
Yes.
oh, I don't know.
I saved the tough ones for last.
Yeah, I never was very good about how, what's your feelings about this, you know.
Right.
It's kind of tough to do.
Yes, sir.
I guess one of the darkest side, they didn't let me stay in London. They sent me on to France, and that's where my girlfriend was. In London.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right.
Oh boy.
You didn't meet any girlfriends while you were in Paris?
No, I didn't have time for that.
Right.
Besides, I couldn't converse with them anyhow.
Let's see.
Didn't bother them. No.
Well, that was certainly a triumph of, individual wills at the time, and, whenever Germany surrendered, were you in Europe during that time?
No. I went back to my group in November, just before the Battle of the Bulge, and then I could have stayed at my group. They wanted me to stay as an instructor for the new crews because they were still flying missions just like they were before. And so I said, no, I want to go home. And so I went home and got home in about the 5th of December. Came back on a real nice boat, well, the nicest boat I've ever owned. It was one of the English ocean-going vessels. It was a sister ship to the Queen Mary.
Oh, that's...
The name of it was the Aquitania, and it was pretty empty going back because it carried stuff over there, carried troops, supplies, and everything. So there wasn't much to take back, but a bunch of old Air Force people, and we had 2 meals a day. And gee whiz, I never saw so damn much food in my life as we had. We'd have breakfast about 7:30, 8:30 or 9 o'clock, and then about 4 we'd have evening meal. But that was all. We weren't doing anything, so that was plenty anyway. And we had so much food, and on top of that, they had snacks up on the deck, coffee and tea and pastry and stuff like that. As you could have most any time you wanted. And
so food was a big change.
yeah,
I see.
and we landed in New York, and people were meeting us, and so first thing I got was a ice cream cone, and the next thing the guy was selling hamburgers, and hamburger and ice cream cone.
Right, right.
So Then I went over about 30-day leave at home, and then went to California for reassignment. And where did they reassign me to? Right back to Fort Worth.
Except you went back a different man. I would bet money that you were a changed man during that time. But after going to Europe and flying those missions.
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
How had you changed whenever you got back? How did you see things differently?
Oh, I knew you was going to ask these kind of questions. I don't know.
Well, let's ask this. Did you keep up in touch with your girlfriend in London?
Nope.
Oh.
Nope.
Did you,
She was a American girl, and over there working in SHAPE headquarters, Eisenhower's headquarters, and so I don't know whatever happened to her.
Well, what did you do on your 30-day leave?
Well, went home and visited a whole bunch of folks, and at that time my brother was in prison camp, and my parents were worried about him, and I tried to assure them that the Germans did treat the American prisoners pretty good, or as good as they could, but when it came to the Russian prisoners, they weren't so good.
Let's see.
So, but he was liberated then when the Canadian Army troops came through where he was in camp and opened it up. They ran off all of the guards and everybody and turned the prisoners loose, and said the first thing that they did was try to find some food, and there wasn't any food to be had, not even chickens or anything like that, you know. So
I'm glad to hear they made it.
yeah,
out.
he went down to about 130 pounds, and they put him in a hospital, all those guys in the hospital to check him out and so forth, and the first thing they gave him was boiled eggs to eat, just a little bit, you know, as they could handle it, because their stomach had shrunk quite a bit from not having very much to eat. And after he was in the hospital there for about, I guess he was in the hospital as long as he was in prison camp almost. He was in prison camp 99 days, and Dad said, "Why didn't you stay one more day to make it 100? He said, "Heck no." I'm glad to get out of there. Anyway. Well, I don't know whether that changed me a lot or not. I came home after the war, went to school here. I had a good time in school. I thought that was going to college was about the best thing you could ever do, and had dances and parties and
Yes,
so forth, and the studies were not that difficult, and so we had a good time.
Did you go back on the GI Bill?
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the great things that happened after the war, I guess.
Yes, sir.
The GI Bill. It sure helped a lot of people.
Well, I think I'll ask this one question,
Okay.
and then I think that I'll see if I can interview you again to get to part 2.
Okay.
All right. Your brother was a prisoner of war,
Yeah.
and after the war ended, you know, the Americans and the rest of the world finally found out what happened during German prisoner of war camps. What was your reaction whenever you heard about that?
Well, he would not tell me very much about his time in the prison camp. I had a cousin that wrote articles put in a local paper called Stories You Can Tell Your Grandchildren. And he had a lot of us to write little stories and put them in the paper. And I wrote several and finally got my brother to write one. And I read that and I thought, holy smoke, he didn't tell me any of this stuff. No, they just didn't talk about it.
Just too tough to
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, if you had something you would say to grandchildren or to a future generation about your experience during World War II, what would that be?
Take all those hawks in Washington and vote them out of office. Stop going to war. United States has fought more wars than any other country in the world. There's hardly a time that we were not fighting somebody somewhere, just for the hell of it, I guess. And that's my theory. I don't know.
Those are very wise words, and they're coming from experience. 25 years of experience.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything in this part of the interview that I haven't asked that you wanted to add?
No, I guess you covered all the time that I was in the Air Force. So that's what we want to do, I guess.
Well, as an American, I would like to thank you for your service to this country. As an oral historian, I'd like to thank you for sharing your experiences with us.
I want to tell you another story.
All right.
A year ago, October, my daughter in Washington got some reservations for me on the airlines and flew me to Washington, and they took me down to that big memorial and where they take all the auto flights to. And I was walking around there, and some woman I was going this way, and she's going this way, and she said, "Thank you for your service." And that's the first time anybody had ever said that to me. And I thought, oh, someone did appreciate some of the stuff I did. Yeah.
Yes, they did.
It was a feeling that I never had before.
Well,
Yeah.
she beat me to it.
Yeah.
But thank you again. You know, I'm sure there are a lot of people in Europe who would thank you personally if they were given the opportunity.
Oh, yeah.
Your role in the war was significant.
Yeah.